Hello Spartans and welcome to Blade and Sorcery U11. Now, as you might tell by the title, yes I have done this video before, but I did it back in U10. Now I want to do it in U11, it is my most viewed video of all time, and I'm not happy with it. I don't like the video, it's old, it's outdated, so I thought I'd bring you a new, up-to-date version with a better mic, a better YouTuber in general, and just take you through basic steps on how to use each weapon, as well as a little tip that most people might not know about the weapon. Anyway, let's just head straight in. One thing I want to quickly say before we get into the video is don't forget to join the Discord, it's linked in the description. I know lots of you guys aren't in there, so don't forget, join the Discord, you'll get notifications on all my uploads, as well as early access to my mods and things like that. So, why not hop in there? See you guys there. Let's go. Okay, so for our first category of weapons, we have the daggers. Now, the daggers you should all be pretty acquainted with already. There is the common dagger and the skinning knife. We're going to cover the common dagger first. So, the common dagger is really a movement weapon. You don't want to be trying to block with this thing. You're just never going to ever really get any blocks off. If you're really good, you can maybe get a quick block into a counter, but you're not really going to land those. It's very difficult, so I recommend getting in, getting a stab, using it to throw as well. Don't forget, throwing the weapon is always very powerful. As well as that, make sure you're going for weak spots with the daggers. So weak spots would be obviously the head, the neck, or the chest. You really don't want to be like stabbing them in the arms. It's going to take too long. Quick stab to the chest and they're going to go down. Same with the head or the neck. Very quick. In, done. And that's all the dagger, really, I would say. That's what you really need to know. Now, the dagger does have slash potential. The dagger can slash for the throat, or the neck, or the face, and actually go for some actual damage there. Whereas with the skinning knife, you're not going to get much damage. Like, if you slash, see it does a little bit of damage, but it's not much. Skinning knife is really just for quick jabs to the head, or to the neck. Chest even doesn't do much damage with the skinning knife. You see, it doesn't insta-kill, it takes 2 hits. So the skinning knife is really a smaller option from the dagger. It's not that powerful, but if you are stuck with the skinning knife, you can use it for some stealth kills. It's pretty good. Now, one tip I would actually recommend with daggers, and this is the only weapon I'm ever going to recommend apart from maybe the axes, and that is to dual wield them. No one really seems to understand that dual wielding is only powerful when you've got 2 weapons of different sizes or 2 small weapons. And that is because if you have 2 different, well, assume I had 2 daggers. When you have 2 daggers, since they don't do a whole lot of damage by themselves, you can go for some really fast hits and put people down fast. Whereas with longer weapons, you're not going to be able to get that fast stabbing motion, as the weapon takes a long time to go in and out. Daggers doesn't have that problem. Anyway, we're done the daggers, let's move on. Okay, and the next weapon I'm going to cover is the longsword. Now, the longsword is the classic kind of classic knight weapon. It's what you want to be using. It's the good all-rounder weapon, and I absolutely love it. I think it's fantastic. And we have the slightly more powerful version of the war sword. Now, they are very slightly differently weighted, so I'm going to cover them separately, starting with the longsword. Now, the longsword, you kind of want to be going for slashes, but it is also good for its thrusts as well, so you can really go for those pretty quickly. It's got nice maneuverability. You can one-hand it if you really need to. It has one-handed potential, so going for those one-handed hits does work, as you can see, but two-handed is the preferred mode of use. Now, one thing about the longsword that people don't use enough of is you can actually grab the blade and use the guard or the pommel to bash. Now, the only thing is, it doesn't do any damage. So what you really want to be using it for when you have this opportunity is to block. Now I'm going to spawn an enemy and we'll see if we can show that off. Because you can do this, but if an enemy is coming low, you want to be able to switch and block downwards very quickly. So, there is that possibility, really. Let's try it out. So we give him a little poke and he should be home active. Now we can try and block with the middle of the blade or the handle, and it should work pretty well. So let's see if he'll attack. So as you can see, you can block with the middle of the blade just like that, and it works pretty well. And you can also get some pretty good accuracy when it comes to your thrusts if you're half swording. It's pretty useful. One thing I would do with longswords is just practice your blocking. go for some nice blocks with the longsword. The longsword's very easy to defend yourself with. It's got a nice wide range, and then you can go for the kill. Now the warsword. The warsword's a little different. It has a lot better movement for one-handing, so it's very powerful when it comes to its one-handed potential, and it's actually more pointed and actually pierces better. So if you really want to go for them thrust kills, I would say the warsword is perfect compared to the longsword. Now, as well as that, the warsword does imbue for a lot longer than the longsword, so that is another thing that you need to keep in mind when using the warsword. It's very powerful, and I absolutely love it. It's powerful in both one-handed and two-handed, and works really well as both. Moving on to the next weapons. And our next weapons are the Greatswords. Now I'm going to start with the weakest of the Greatswords, which is the Antique Greatsword. Now this weapon is not inherently weak, but it is the weakest of the three. It's pretty huge, got a nice long range to it, and it is great for slashing. Now, one thing I recommend learning when you use the big weapons is don't swing with your front arm. A lot of people do that. Make sure you put the controllers together and use it like a real sword. Take your real big swings out. That's how you're going to practice, that's how you're going to learn to get those big accurate shots, and it really does help when you're trying to go for those decaps. Now, one thing I will say is do not try to one-hand these weapons. As you can see, it's just too heavy, it's not going to happen. You can maybe get a really slow swing in there, but it's pretty difficult to get anything effective. I mean, that was a dummy. If you're fighting real enemies, it's going to be tough, so I highly recommend you don't do that. Now, this is the weakest of the Greatswords. We also have two others, and there is the Claymore, which is probably the heaviest of the lot. You're not really going to one-hand this ever, but it does have the biggest reach. And with the biggest reach comes the most power. Now, this thing can send your enemies skyward pretty easily. Once you've unbalanced them, it's over for them. Now, piercing isn't too bad with the Greatswords. You can give it a good pierce, but as you can see, the piercing potential is pretty slow when you compare it to the other weapons. So I would really be going for big, powerful swings with the Greatsword. Moving on to the actual Greatsword. Now, the Greatsword, one thing that pains me is that you can't hold the Greatsword here to do any kind of half swording, back swording, whatever you want to call it. But the Greatsword is great in reverse grip as well. If you want to be able to get decent blockage of your full body, you can hold it this way, but this gives you a lower block, so it's actually really maneuverable, really powerful for taking big swings. And it's very, very powerful when it comes to big slashes. As you'll be able to see from here, if you take a big long swing, it's pretty damn powerful. I do like it, and its pierce potential, again, isn't amazing, but this is the most powerful of the three, and it will also imbue for longer than the others. So you can imbue this for way longer than the other two. So if you like imbued weapons, if you like your big fire swords, highly recommend the Greatsword. It does less damage than the other two, but it is overall more well-rounded than the other two. Whereas the Antique Greatsword is a lighter, faster version of them, and the Claymore is the heavier one. This is your middle grounder. Now, one thing I do recommend learning with these weapons is, again, make sure you use bashes, half-swording like you do with the Greatsword and the Longsword. It is just amazing. You can get so much accuracy off, especially if you're holding the blade and you go for a slash like that. You've got this area to work with, and if you miss, you've got this area to work with. So if they're close range, swinging like this, you're going to end up hitting with the guard. If you come in close like that, you're going to end up cutting with this edge, and it's perfect. Moving on to the next category. So our next weapon is actually all by itself, and that's the Reverend sword, because I felt like it was a kind of a hybrid compared to the other weapons. Now, this weapon is a two-hander, but it's also very effective one-handed, and it's also a good piercing weapon. It's my favourite all-round sword in the game, as it just has so much potential for speed and agility. When it comes to this, you can move pretty effectively while slashing, and you have loads of range for a one-handed or a two-handed weapon. It's the most versatile weapon I find in the game, and it just destroys for its level. It's only a tier 1, and it just demolishes. Now, what would I recommend doing with the Reverend sword? Well, really, all I recommend as a little tip is make sure you're switching between two and one-handed attacks, as you can get more power with two, but less power with the one-handed, but you get more agility with one-handed, you can move around more, and it works just like that. Alright, let's move on to the next set. Okay, so the next set of weapons all works in a bit of a trio, but we're going to cover them separately in kind of a little group. Okay, so they are the short swords. Now there are 3 of them in the game. 2 of them are piercing weapons, the other one is a slashing, so I'll kind of try and cover them relative to each other. So first of all, let's cover the piercing weapons. So we have the riding sword and the antique sword. Now these are definitely piercing based weapons. This can slash better than this can, but let's start with the antique. So the antique is kind of like your gladius style weapon. It's very good at getting in there, going for the pierces, very agile, probably one of the most fun weapons to use in the game. You can really get in there fast, take enemies out, and you really want to go for the weak spots on this, as like I said, stabbing in the leg with this weapon, it's not going to do you a whole lot of good, but as soon as you hit the head, it's all over. Now one thing I would say about the antique sword is, don't forget that throwing the weapon is quite powerful. It really is, and this specific one is very easy to throw, it's very simple, it's a simple weapon, and it can really demolish. So don't forget, throwing helps a lot of the time, especially if you're carrying other weapons. You can just discard that one, go for a kill, and that's that. Now, the riding sword. The riding sword is the most powerful. It can be imbued for the longest amount of time. It is a tier 4 weapon, and it is a piercing monster. Look how easily it pierces through that leather armor, and also it can actually decapitate pretty well. So it's probably your best short sword option, and I'm just going to show you. I would actually say for parrying and deflecting, it's also the best. It's got a lot of maneuverability, as you can see, very easy to counter and block, and as well, the movement with this weapon, you can really get around enemies and finish them off quickly. Now, one tip I would give with the riding sword, as well with the short sword that we're going to cover next, is just move, just keep moving. If the enemy can't hit you, you can't die, basically. So just keep your movement very fast, and the enemy's never going to touch you. That's all I have to say. And with the short sword, it's relatively the same, except the piercing isn't as much on this weapon. It's all about slashes. This is a very slashy weapon, as you can see. Decap after decap. Missed that one, but you get my point. It is just a monster. Now, I like to pair the short sword up with the round shield. It's a great combination. Gives you a chance to block and stab, slash, balance, slash, and you can kind of combo them really well. They're designed for each other in my opinion. So don't forget, that's another tip with the short sword. Partner it with the shield. You get so much maneuverability when it comes to that. So if we just give this a little poke, I can give you a demonstration. Just block, poke, get back in your position, block, slash. It's not a problem. Moving on to our next set of weapons. So our next set of weapons comes in a 3, and that is the lumber axe, the baddish, and the northern axe. So let's start with the lumber axe. The lumber axe is a pretty weak weapon. You're not going to get a whole lot of damage out of it. So really, you just want to be going for those head hits. That's where your damage is at. Otherwise, the lumber axe just isn't going to perform for you. And you definitely don't really want to be one-handed in this, as you can see. It's just not all that powerful. Now, that's pretty much of the lumber axe. The northern axe, on the other hand, is very powerful. The northern axe, again, you want to go for the neck, but you can go for the leg as well. And don't forget, you can bash with this. It does have damages, so you can really give them a good bash. As well as that, you can actually use it to block. You have a whole shaft here to block with, so I really recommend using that a lot. Not to mention, this thing hurts. And it also digs in deep, so don't forget, use your kicks to knock enemies down, and then you can go for the big slam and launch their body. Wish you arrived back here, but you get my point. And that kind of goes for the same with the baddish, except the baddish has a little bit of an advantage. The baddish has an extra handle, which gives you a lot of potential for accurate axe hits. Now this is the most unique axe in my opinion, and that's because, like I said, you can be very accurate with it. It also gives you kind of like a fist weapon. You can even grab it like this and punch for the neck. But it does function like a normal axe if you need it to. Anyway, moving on to the next set of weapons. So our next set of weapons are these small axes, and first of all we're starting with the hatchet. Now the hatchet is not that strong, not really, it's okay, but really it's a throwing weapon. And look at that, it just embeds in really nicely. You can go for those throws. That wasn't the best one, but you get my point. Right in the kneecap, and it's pretty powerful for throwing, so I highly recommend using it for throwing. And you can also go for quick head hits, but it's not that good. If it's the only weapon you've got for stealth, it can work. You can like go for the quick hits if you have to, but I wouldn't recommend it. I'd just use it as a spare throwing weapon if you find one lying around. Now the other two weapons we have, the two axes. Now, there is one big difference in this, and I'm sure you can see by the difference. There is a spike on the back of this one. So, let's start with the normal axe. Normal axe has two different ways of using it. You have your normal axe fighting style, which is just basically dig it in, slash, whatever. And then you have axe brawling, which is possibly my favourite way to use axes. You grab them whole by the top, and you can just punch for the neck, or grab their head and punch, stab, slash, slash, punch, whatever you want to do. There's a lot of maneuverability. Something I wouldn't recommend as much with the war axe. It's not as good for that, but what the war axe is good for is if you knock an enemy to the ground, you can grab this end of the weapon, put a spike on it, and you can stab the spike into their head. And that will should insta-kill as well. Just like that. So you have two modes of preparing an attack, essentially. So you can go for the axe hit, and then on the back end, the spike. So it's essentially a double-headed axe with two different ways of fighting, which I think is fantastic. It's also, again, the most powerful axe when it comes to imbues, so it will be imbued for the longest amount of time. Moving on to the next set of weapons. Now, the next set of weapons I have for you are the big blunts. We have the war mace, the maul, and the mallet. Now, they're all very different, but all function pretty similarly in a way. They're all just kind of different tiers of each other. So first of all, we have the war mace. Now, the war mace can stab on the end, which I highly recommend keeping an eye out for opportunities to do that to the head, as if you get it in the head properly, it should kill. It's just quite hard to land. But there we go, instant kill. Now, as well as that, it's just incredibly powerful. Hits very hard, and it's a whole lot of fun when imbued with gravity, I'll tell you that much. So yeah, don't sleep on the war mace. Shit's fun. Moving on to the next one, we have the maul. Now the maul is a purely blunt weapon, but it hits hard. And with hard hits come rewarding clips. And I highly recommend imbuing this with gravity again. And also, if you can go for those body shots, if they're hard enough, you can hit them to the ground. So you can hit them with a hit to the head after, and that should kill them. Now, moving on to the last of the hammers, we have the mallet. Now the mallet, it's not my favourite, doesn't do a whole lot of damage, but it's fun to get a hit off now and then, and use. It's not that powerful, but it exists, and if you have to use it, use it. Now, tips with the hammers, really just go for the head and hit as hard as you can. Honestly, imbuing with gravity helps a lot, it really does make them more powerful. But yeah, moving on to the next weapons. So, the next two weapons are what I would call the meme weapons. We have the blacksmith hammer and the rock. Now, I'm sure you guys have seen NPCs throw rocks at you. Well, you can throw rocks at the NPCs now. And it works pretty well, actually. The rock's also good for just pounding someone's face in. That's all it's really good for. It's just a bit of fun. Same with the blacksmith hammer, really. It's just a bit of fun. You can throw it for some nice damage, but really, see, it didn't even kill him off a throw. And honestly, you'd be better off just using your hands. I really think the hands are just more beneficial than a mallet. I really think the hands are just going to do better than the blacksmith hammer or rock, so I wouldn't even bother. Moving on to the next weapons. Okay, so the last two weapons in the blunts are the flange mace and the trench mace. They both function exactly the same except for one main difference, and that will be the pierce on the flange mace, but the flange mace really hits hard. It does a lot of damage, and the trench mace is basically the exact same, except it doesn't have a pierce, and I feel like it's actually more versatile. It's lighter, easier to use, does more blunt damage than the flange mace. So yeah, trench mace is very fun. Dual wielding these again is so much fun, and with a shield it works too, so enjoy that. Okay, now we have the dual blade staff. Now the dual blade staff is one of those ones that kind of confuses the community a lot, which I actually really enjoy. It's not an easy weapon to use, I will admit, but when you get the hang of it, it's really good. So there are two main functions. You can slash or pierce, and you can use it in two different ways. You can use it as a slashing weapon, or a piercing weapon, like a spear. So, a lot of people tend to use it like a long range short sword or a slashing spear like a glaive. That can work, it really can, but I actually find it more efficient to use it more like a spear. So you would kind of go for the back jab if you can, if it will pierce, and then you can go for the big stab like that. And the fact that it has two ends to it really gives you potential for some quick kills. You can go like stab into there and stab, or whatever, slash. You've got two ends, you can use them both. It's not the most ideal weapon, it's not the most efficient, but it's a hell of a lot of fun, and I recommend trying it out. Now our next weapon is the Rapier. Now the Rapier is fantastic. It's just the best kind of dueling weapon in my opinion. You can really get off some quick parries and pokes. And what I would use it for, I would never use it to slash. Unless you're going to hit the neck like that, slashing is almost useless on this weapon. It's just not going to do a whole lot. But if you get a good stab in, it's just instantly game over for said enemy. Now, Rapiers are all about counters. So if I can get him to pull out his weapons, let's see what we can do. And we need to keep a good range. We want to use our range with the Rapier. That's the most beneficial thing about the Rapier. And we can just kind of keep him away, keep him at a good range, and poke for the face, and it's all over. Now, yeah, with the Rapier, the best advice I can give is just keep your range, know your distance. If you think how far I can keep that, all I need to do is step forward, and he's dead. So he can't hit me with any weapon in the game. No enemy can hit me with any weapon in the game, but I can hit them from that range, and I think that is awesome. All it takes is one little poke. So really use your range with this weapon. Anyway, moving on to the next one. And our next weapon is the wrist blade. Now the wrist blade, I'll be honest, everyone loves it. Everyone thinks, oh my god, it's such an amazing weapon. It's the most impractical piece of shit. But you can do damage. You really can. And you can kill pretty fast with it too. Now, the wrist blade really is a stealth weapon, first and foremost. That's how I see it. I've always seen it that way. You don't really want to be fighting with this one, like head to head. You're not going to block. It's got great maneuverability if you're trying to dodge around the enemies or fight, but really, it's a stealth weapon, right? I mean, it's based off an Assassin's Creed blade. You're going to use it to get in on enemies and do some damage. That's really it. That's the best advice I can give, is just, if you're in this with a dungeon, don't get spotted, just use it as stealth. That's my best advice. Try and use it to go for quick attacks to the face, finish them off fast. That's all you need to know. Moving on. Now our final set of weapons is the spears, and we are starting with the javelin. Now the javelin I find incredibly hard to throw. It's not actually a practical weapon to throw, so if you want to learn how to throw it better, try in slow-mo. You see how it jolts upwards? I really want them to fix that, because right now the javelin, even for throwing, isn't good. It's only good for using like a short spear as a one-handed spear, and that would be the way I would recommend using it, as a short spear. Now it's very fun to try and throw, but 90% of the time it's just going to jolt upwards like that for no reason. So yeah, I wouldn't highly recommend it. And the bow spear is probably the better weapon, to be honest. It has lots of range, lots of potential for quick stabs, slashes, and pokes. You can actually go for neck slashes with it, and disarm enemies like I just did. And it can slash. It's not great slashing, but if you get really close like this, and you hold the bow spear, and you kind of grab their head. You can go for quick pokes, slashes, and use it like a dagger, but you can also give it the most possible range you could give it, and take people out like that. Now the bow spear can also be thrown, but it's not, again, it's not great. It works, but it's not great. I don't recommend throwing it. You've got more leverage when you hold it, but if you can throw it, and you can use it effectively, give it a go. And honestly, I think that does it for our dungeon. And honestly, I think that is gonna do it. I think that is every weapon covered. I really hope that that video gave you more ideas on how to use the weapons than my last one. At least it's higher quality, right? And yeah, I really hope you enjoyed. Have a good day, guys. I'll see you in a bit.